Life with Liliana and Friends.
Welcome to this evening's episode of Life with Liliana and Friends. We're in season 5 and we're already on episode 3. We're talking around the topic trauma, and this has been really interesting because at the beginning people have said, oh, trauma, that's not for me. But one thing we've established so far is that we realize all of us have actually been through some kind of trauma. So we spoke in the first 2 episodes with Melania, my brilliant daughter, remember her? So she came on because she's been talking about trauma in different spaces. She's currently a postgrad student studying psychology, so she's really passionate about this topic. So we talked a bit about the technical aspect, if you like, of trauma, what the definition is, how you can identify trauma. And then in the second episode, we went into healing because, of course, we don't want to sit in our trauma our whole lives. Sadly, though, we have so much unresolved trauma. And in the spaces that I've been in, I hope you're following on Life with Liliana Pareti Warid page, which is my public page, because there you're able to see a lot of the spaces that we're in the community. And I chose intentionally to talk about trauma because sadly, a lot of the social issues that we're seeing on the ground are rooted in trauma, whether we realize it or not. So this is a really important topic, and we're going to start to unpick it in different ways, which we've already started doing. Now, last week was our first live session that I held, and we're trying different things based on a lot of feedback that you've given. Thank you so much. But the reason why we thought we'd do live and talk about my experience with trauma is because we often fail to connect the theory of things to behaviors in ourselves, or how can we apply it in our own lives. And I often use the example of church, right? So most of us go to church every Sunday. We hear about kingdom principles. We hear about how Jesus behaved. We hear about God's promises. But yet, our behaviors and our actions do not reflect what we learn. The hardest part is bringing to life the knowledge that we have. And so one of the key intentions of the live session that I did last week was to bring the technicalities of trauma and then talk about how I was able to use that to identify trauma in my own life. So it wasn't the most pleasant of things to talk about how I struggled with gossip, how I was unable to confront things because of the trauma that I experienced in the home. Because I grew up with my dad used to drink a lot, and so there was a lot of instability in the home. And I chose those examples because I know it's very, very common, right? So I really hope that you managed to watch that. If not, it's on the Life with Liliana page. You can also go to YouTube and catch up. Tonight, though, we're going to start moving into trauma in those different social issues that I had spoken about. So one of the areas or the communities where I've been spending a lot of time is the sex workers community. Now, let me just say, this is not an area where I thought I'd be called to, but God opened that door and I just walked through it, and I am so, so thankful. It's a real gift for me to be able to get alongside the community, and I've made some great friends already. But one of the things, again, that I just mentioned earlier, is that I realized every single story that has been shared with me has a root of trauma. And so I'm learning all these things and trying to piece stuff together. And tonight I thought I'd invite my good friend who's been on the show already, who's worked in this space, to come and educate us a bit on the connection between trauma and sex workers. So tonight we have Letila Shelton, who's joining us again, who's back in town from Toowoomba. Welcome, Tish. Thank you for joining us.
Great to be back.
Last time she talked about pornography, but we're really happy to have you on the show. See, we brought out the nice china for the white girl.
For the queen.
And your peppermint tea, so don't forget to drink it. We drink peppermint tea in Fiji all the time,
Really?
Yeah. But anyway, so we're going to unpack this a little bit from the perspective of sex workers, because she knows a lot better about this than me. But I thought first, Tish, maybe, because we didn't talk in detail about this when you last came, but if you could share with us your role back in Toowoomba, the stuff you do, all the different areas you're involved in, but then specifically around the sex workers, because you've been involved in this space for like 20 odd years.
Yes. So about the year 2000, I started a non-for-profit organisation called City Women, which is about mobilising women, particularly from across the churches, to work together to help the vulnerable. So I really started off focusing on the teenage girls because a lot of them have trauma. Many of them, 1 in 4, have been abused, the rejection, just so much heavy stuff at such a young age. And so a big part of wanting to work with teenage girls and help them heal their trauma is so they don't end up in the sex industry. When we say sex industry, I don't mean necessarily at a brothel. OnlyFans, that's the online sex industry these days. Sugar daddies, all these other issues that we're not always quite aware of. So anyway, focused a lot on teenage girls for many years, and in the last our brothel opened in our city about 11 years ago, and we really began to engage in there. So
so tell us a bit about the work you do on the streets, because you're not just sitting in an office, which I found very interesting about you. You're not just sitting there like advocating for policies, and that's part of your work, but could you tell us a bit about where you spend a lot of your time with the actual girls?
Yes, I think it's important that we don't just sit in our office. You get to know the real world when you're out there. So in our city, unlike Fiji, where your sex workers are out just down the street here, they're by the Westpac Bank down in Suva during the day. Ours, we have a legalised brothel. So 11 or 12 years ago, our government decided we needed a legalised brothel. And they kind of do that to say that they're all going to be looked after and safe and yada yada. And then we have a big strip club. Then we also have massage parlours. So particularly Asian massage places which offer extra sex services, which is illegal as well. And then for every 10,000 people in a city, there's at least one illegal brothel. So they will operate out of hotels, homes, and so I've learnt to work out what the signs of a home that is operating as a legal brothel. So they're all just the different areas. So generally we do regular outreaches to the brothel, to the strip club. During the days, quite often I'm visiting the massage places, just trying to get information for the police. And we've knocked on the doors of some of these illegal brothels, again just trying to garner. Well, firstly, there's real women there, and I care about their lives and what's going on and where have they come from, especially the ones who might have been trafficked from Asia. And then secondly, how can we report this to the police and be part of just their safety.
So you intervene at the level of the young girls before they even step into that, but also those that are in there. So when you're going into, I'm just trying to imagine this, if you're going to a strip club, what are you actually talking to the women about? Are you telling them, get out of here?
No, not at all. So we're walking in there, me and my, we always say, there's always 2 of us. We're walking in there with a big platter of fruit and cakes, and we kind of walk past the bar and the stage and right down the back into, they have a dressing room, and the managers just allow us in there where you might have 20 or 30 strippers coming on and off. It's very hectic. They're putting on their makeup. It smells like perfume. It's they're all there, and we just sit with the food and just might come alongside while they're doing their makeup and just begin to talk. And I'm always looking for the new girls because they're always really afraid and nervous and really just need to talk out because they're trying to justify why I'm here. They don't always feel good about being there. So it's just having these conversations. It's amazing how many of them open up about their trauma, about their life. And the key is just to listen. We will say, hey, we're church ladies from the churches in town, which shocks them. But that's as far as we go with preaching, unless they ask. But quite often there's a lot of trauma. And if it's appropriate, we'll pray with them. But then as they get to know us, I remember one night a lady, one of the strippers, had met me twice, and she came in and she said, so you're from the church? And I said, yes. And she said, I've been waiting to see you. I need to tell you about my depression.
Wow.
And so it's just good that they know that we're there, we're willing to listen.
Yes.
So
And
just
I love
being
that.
available.
Yes, and just being consistent as well.
Being consistent is such a key.
Yeah.
And because when I came to Fiji, I was always asking, well, who's reaching the sex workers? And you'd hear people who would say, we've dropped food off to them once, or, you know, done something. And I'm like, well, that's nice, but it's got to be consistent, build relationship.
And build trust, because there's been a lot of hurt in those spaces too. Well, now I'm realizing, now that I've been able to go a few times.
Absolutely.
Before you continue, can we just talk a little bit about the term sex workers? Because I never used the word sex workers until a few months ago. I always said prostitutes. Is there, and I'm trying to be very careful not to offend anyone. So is there a reason why we call them sex workers and not prostitutes?
They, in Australia, so they would like to be called sex workers because they want it to be seen as a normal job.
Okay.
Although I wouldn't call it. We don't want it to be a profession that we're encouraging, say the ACS girls.
Right.
Hey, this is another option if you want to be a nurse.
Doctor, accountant, or sex worker. So we don't want to normalize it.
We don't want to, but they do.
Yes.
And when I go there, I'm not there to have arguments. I'm just there to love and support them.
Yeah, I love that.
But, you know, ultimately, I would never want to see my daughter given the option. Because, again, of all the trauma and what it does to them.
That's right.
And so the ones who get out of it, they actually describe it as paid rape, an industry of paid rape. They said essentially that's what happened to them every night.
Oh my
so
goodness.
There's a big difference between the ones who are in it and the ones who are out of it and what they say.
So I can imagine people have very different opinions on, you know, what to call them and what's okay. And it's okay if you disagree that it should be normalized. But then I think it's also important, like you said, is to be clear about where you stand, you know, as individuals, for all of us, really. Where do you stand with this? And be confident enough to own your opinion and your views on sex work.
And I've said that many times in the strip club. I've said, look, because they're shocked that we're from the church. And I said, look, you know, we don't agree with what you're doing, but we will love you and help you no matter what.
Yeah,
and I think they even like that more, the fact that we're in there, not loving what they're doing, but loving them.
Yes, and that's really powerful. For those of you who don't know, Tish is actually a pastor as well, like went to Bible school, pastor, like we were talking about today. And so, because I think the church sometimes is not sure, or my observation has been in the few short months, not quite sure where to go or where to stand, or if we're loving on them, does that mean we are condoning what they do? You know, I've had to process that myself as a follower of Christ, but that's exactly where I've landed. You know, his greatest commandment says to love him first and love others, love him and love others. And that's all really we need to do. And if we're given the opportunity to pray, like, let's grab it and do it.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
But look, out of us being consistent and turning up now year after year after year, they contact us.
Wow.
They've been to our weddings, we've been to theirs, we've done baby showers, birthday parties, christenings. So then we've done dinners. So it's just building that relationship like normal people.
Yes.
And getting a part of their life.
And have you seen a lot of them come out of that?
A number of them have. It's a high turnover industry.
Okay.
Generally, people pop in and out for different reasons. Look, there'll be some who've been there for years, but it's a very high turnover just because of the nature.
Right.
But our brothel manager will happily call us and say, there's one who wants to get out, can you come and help them? And they're not worried.
Yes.
Because they know they'll replace them really fast, unfortunately.
Yes.
But we just want to be available.
I look forward to the day when we have that here, you know, when somebody wants to get out. And I mentioned earlier, and I've said this briefly on the show, the sad thing here is that, especially when now that drugs is in our system, when people want to come out, it's more than just, you know, let me hold your hand and help you find opportunities. It's like we have addicts and we don't have the facilities to be able to deal with that rehabilitation. Yeah. So it's heartbreaking, really, some of these examples that I've seen.
Absolutely.
But that's really interesting. You know, sometimes I'm messaging Letila and saying, oh, what are you doing tonight? Oh, I'm just going down to the strip club, and then I'll be at the streets. And I always think that if somebody saw our messages, they'll think that she was a a sex worker herself,
Definitely
spending her
not.
Friday nights at the strip club.
Uh-huh.
So I want to talk a bit about the reasons
Yeah.
why people get into sex work. So I'm going to be really honest here and say that for someone that grew up not knowing anybody in that industry, or not even, like, I just kind of felt like it was something so far away from me and has nothing to do with me. When I grew up and I started to learn a bit more about it, in my head I was like, well, why don't we just give them all jobs? Because they're there to put food on the table. I realized it is not that simple. It is way more complex. So could you talk to us a bit about some reasons why people choose, from your experience, to go and do sex work?
Yes, and I must say, there's not one overriding answer I've found. So whenever I'm in our strip club or our brothel, and especially if I'm meeting a new one, I will always ask them, non-judgmentally, so why are you here? Or why did you choose this?
Right.
Because before our brothel and strip club opened, myself and our organisation, we were very active in wanting them not to open.
Okay.
Because again, these places bring in drugs and crime and all sorts of stuff. But people would argue with me, well, these women, it's their choice, it's empowering them. And that's the big argument I always get. So I always love to ask, so why are you here?
Right.
And I think statistics around sex workers is that over 90% of them have been abused at some point in their life.
Interesting.
So it doesn't take much for them to walk into the door of a brothel. Like if I suddenly became bankrupt and I needed money, I've never been sexually abused, so that's a big step for me to go.
Right.
But a lot of these are like, well, I've been abused, let's go get paid to be abused. In fact, our brothel manager, who I invited to be the guest speaker at one of our church events, she just said, before you ladies call forth fire from heaven on me, I want to tell you my story.
Wow.
I was adopted into a pedophile ring here in Australia as a young girl.
Yes.
I became pregnant at 12. I had 4 teenage sons. So I decided I'm just going to go get paid to be abused.
Wow.
And we were all crying. And I purposely brought her because I wanted to humanise that these people are beautiful.
Yes.
They all have a story. They all have a reason. So you've kind of got the extremes of her. Other people have just told me, I just want to renovate my bathroom.
Really?
Yes. So this is Australia I'm talking about.
Yes, don't get any ideas.
Yes.
People.
No, that's it.
You won't. I don't know whether you'll get enough to renovate your bathroom in Fiji anyway.
You might get one toilet. Look, quite often it's I want power over men. There is a real hatred of men in there, and I hear it often. I hate men, and I'm here to get power over them.
Wow.
But so they think, because they're suddenly in control, and especially in a strip club because you can't have sex as such, or you're not even meant to touch them.
Right.
So they feel like they're really in control there. But unfortunately there's a hatred of men because of what's happened before.
Wow.
Some it is financial. Some are just trying to get their way through college, and they can work at a cafe for 37 hours a week or do one shift at strip club.
Yes.
And if you're good, I mean this, how much information you want to know, but if you're really good, you can earn a lot of money. If you're not, you've got to hustle.
Yes. So it would be, because we were wanting to, this session I'm just thinking through the relation of trauma to taking up sex work. And, it does sound like, because you mentioned earlier, one of the statistics of just over 90% of them, or around 90% are abused. So obviously that trauma is unresolved because this is a way it's manifested out, right? That's really interesting. And I think, like I said, it's similar in Fiji. It's so far what I've heard. I really like also about like that story and how you mentioned that we need to humanize them. And I think that has been one of the most heartbreaking things for me coming into this space, but also with our volleyball teams, because we have, we were going through, the past few months with one of them in remand, and we're trying to get bail. And I was sharing this journey on Facebook, and there was so much criticism, just saying, oh, well, that's how they're going to learn a lesson. And, just throw them in there and they deserve this. And, straight away, because I know them as individuals, it's heartbreaking. And they have families that are, watching all these comments. And then recently, one of the comments on the sex workers, because we tried to start that little business, and it's interesting that lady said, because she was talking to church ladies, right? In your example, like before you call down the fire from heaven to come and like swallow her up, like let her tell her story. And it's the same thing, because this individual said, like, we just need to lay hands on them and deliver them. But there's so much more to that, and I really wish that we'd be a little bit more empathetic. If it was your friend or your child, or we would look at it so differently. And I don't think we have any right to talk like that about anyone without first hearing their story. That's not fair.
Absolutely.
And especially as Christians, I think we are called to a higher standard of behavior, and we should be setting the example. Now, you've also seen some sex workers come out of the industry. Those are great stories. And, we've been using these words from trauma to triumph. But I can imagine it must be quite a journey after that. Could you talk a bit about what sort of things you've heard that they struggle with when they've come out of that and try and live a life outside of that industry?
Yes, it's a lot of them when they're in it are on drugs.
Yes.
So
right.
having to get off drugs.
Yes.
Which is hard, because that's another whole community.
Right.
And look, we are lucky in Australia that we do have rehab centres and other things, so at least there's places they can go to. It's a big shock to go from earning a lot of money to not. So one beautiful woman, has gone from working in a brothel to being a cleaner, and that's a big adjustment. And so learning to do all that. But yeah, I think it is, especially if you're been in prostitution, you could have slept with hundreds of men, which, and sex is just not a physical act, but it's the whole body, it's everything.
Yes.
And so there's flashbacks, and because they disassociate themselves as well, so they have the ability to have sex without really engaging. So it's just, you need a lot of counselling.
Yes.
So a lot of support with them. And you just got to be ready for a long, hard journey.
Yes.
Like our brothel manager, she did come out of it, and now she's running a horse farm. But she's got 4 sons who all have huge issues. But she's been through a lot, and I just keep in contact with her. And you can't make them do anything.
Yeah.
They've got to get help when they want it. But you just got to stick by them.
Yes.
I think because they're so used to people coming and going.
Yes.
But it's, there's many different factors. The ability to have healthy relationships, a lot of them never trust men again.
Right.
So it's layer upon layer.
Yes. So this is a big issue for us, because I am just thinking through, like I'm thinking of specific people in my head, and like you said, Australia has all those facilities. Not only do we not have proper drug rehabilitation facilities, but we don't have enough qualified counselors, and any counsellor will tell you the same thing. And these are such important things to have in place in order for us to give, the sex workers and others who are struggling with different things a real goal at life. And it makes me so sad to think about it, that we do so much work, but that part is still lacking. I just wanted to ask, for those who come out, maybe we can move into this space now, just the last part of our conversation around healing. So, but for these ones who choose to come out, is there a specific program for them that you have, or does it just depend a case by case?
Yeah, it's case by case.
Okay.
Obviously, the ones who have done the best are the ones who have found Jesus.
Yes.
So I go to a lot of conferences to end sexual exploitation, and you'll have a lot of ex-sex workers. And the ones who know Jesus and the ones who don't, it's very different, because the ones who do have worked through a lot of forgiveness.
Yes.
And so there is quite a big difference. Not that it's impossible, but having a community around you. So even in Fiji, if you don't have all the professional help, just knowing that there's a group of people that will love you no matter what goes a long way for bringing healing. And they will test that, and they will almost, fight against that love because they're just not used to having unconditional love.
Right.
But if you can stand strong, and again, I've had to do this with a number of people, it will change their life.
Wow.
I've stood outside. We had one young woman who was prostituting herself in a pub. There was an upstairs room, and she was in our care and then ran away. And one night I just went and stood out in the freezing cold for hours, just waiting. I said, I'm not going home until you come down from there. And after about 3 hours, she did. And she's turned her life around. She's gotten married, had twins, and every time she introduces me, this is T. She stood outside the pub for 3 hours. And then there was a whole year's more journey.
Yes.
But it's just sticking by them.
Yeah.
Which we don't do. In the church, we want them to,
clean
do
up
this,
themselves,
get themselves
and,
together. And
get holy first.
And it's all got to happen in 2.5 seconds.
Because we are all holy in the church, right? Without sin.
Well, I am. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
And plus, God's got to do the work. But anyway.
Yeah. I want to come and see you guys and what you do there at some stage.
You're doing it here.
Trying to. So learning from people like you. So I'm just wondering, just to end off, like for those who are watching and the community, you said a little bit, but then, how can we help? Like, how can we practically love on them? Like, say, for example, you already mentioned around Westpac. I mean, we see them, and some you can tell who they're sex workers. I've realized, though, I've met a number, and I'll be like, I wouldn't have no idea. But then some, who hang around those places, we as a community, what can we do? Because quite often we kind of like cross the road to the other side, or we walk this way. Is there anything we can do, or do you think it's a bit much, or what would your suggestion be?
Yeah, look, again, this is not everyone's cup of tea, and not everyone's called to it, and that's okay.
Yes.
Now you're going to have a drink of tea.
Yes.
But there are some. So I think, those who have a passion, and quite often when I speak in churches, people come forward and go, I've always wanted to do this, but I haven't known how.
Right.
So I think it's good to have a team and just assess, So on the weekend I was in the Sorry, and they'd heard me preach a few years ago, and they decided they wanted to go on the street. So they didn't know what to do. So the first few weeks they've just been going out in the car and just driving around trying to assess what is there.
Right.
And then they found a taxi driver to kind of confirm, is that one of them?
Wow.
And then kind of next week they then got the courage to go out and say hello. So
I love that.
I love it. It's just been, because
like
I'm
do
so
something.
scared. Yes.
Yeah.
But a few of them are gone together. And then they're being consistent. So I think you've got to really not just decide this is something I want to do. Who can I do it with? Is anyone already doing it? So we have a team that already goes down Bramble Street.
That's right.
So
and I think, sorry to interrupt you, because you're just talking about consistency, because I think we also need to be honest with ourselves. Like, what can you manage? Because some have young kids, and then, or you might have a really busy job, or maybe your heart is into something else. So don't force yourself to go into that space, because it can be quite emotional sometimes. So, as you know, for me, I haven't once been out on the street, and I know that, Kessa and the girls and some of the girls from our church go down, but it really works for me that I get to go to their safe house and then sit there and be present and help them with also some of the operational things, because that's where my strengths are. But all of us, if we want to, can give something in some way to a space.
I think that's important. I mean, when we go on the streets here in Suva, we need someone to bake, because we take food and hot chocolate.
Right.
It's just good knowing who's out there and who can help, because sometimes we hear some needs. Oh, they need some clothes or whatever. So there is different levels, but it is knowing where you think you can help and then committing to it.
Because then we need to be consistent, right? If we're really going to make a dent in this and not just get excited today about this whole, they were talking about this and I want to go and do this. No, it's not about that. So maybe what I can say to viewers, if you are interested in doing something in this space, just send us a message on our Facebook page, and we will connect you to the right people. Yeah. And even if it's just financial and you don't want to see anyone, that's fine too. Or like Tish said, or baking, you might want to bake a cake once a month and let us know, and I will pick up the cake and I will join them for tea as well, just to make sure it's But thank you, Tish. This evening has been so useful. And I also just wanted to thank you for your heart and, just always coming back to Fiji, because we're still learning, and you've always been so generous with your time and your feedback. And I know you're doing some work upskilling pastors on how they can have these conversations, because so many of us are in the church, but I think we struggle a bit when it comes to what to do when somebody comes to you with like, okay, I'm a sex worker and I want to come out of it, and probably like, I guess first thing we do is let's just pray, let's pray and then go away. So thank you for your time. And, I know what you're doing here is just going to make such a difference for the generations to come. And so I learned so much from you, and I thank you for your time, and thank you for joining us on the show.
My pleasure.
Awesome. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Again, we learned so much from the shows. And what we're going to do next week is actually speak to a lady who used to be a sex worker, who now spends her time just loving on sex workers. But one of the most important things she does is try to keep them safe, because it is actually quite unsafe out there on our streets. It's unsafe for anybody in Fiji right now, whether you're a sex worker or not. That part I know. So please don't forget to join in. Share this one if you can with your friends and your family. Don't forget to follow the Liliana Paretiwa Read page, because of a lot of the work that we're doing on the ground comes out on that page. And then on Life with Liliana, we talk to some guests, and we actually will bring some stories to you there. But thank you for joining us this evening. Don't forget to share this with your friends so that they can catch up before next week. And if you haven't seen the previous 3 episodes, please catch up, because all of this together will make a lot more sense, and I promise you it'll add value to your lives. If you need any help, I sometimes forget to say this, but feel free to message us, private message us on the page, and then we will connect you with somebody. Don't worry, I'm not going to do any counseling, and I'm not going to lay hands on anybody, but we will connect you with the right people so you can get help. Let's just do what we can do while we are still setting up things at a national level. But I wish you all a great weekend, and I will see you back here again, same time, same place next week.
Life with Liliana and Friends.